Hello, and welcome again to What If Natives Won, a video blogging channel about alternate history and American Indians, Native Americans, indigenous peoples. This is the 6th video of 28 planned ones. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story anthology, What If Natives Won. This is what this video and blogging channel are about. There's a huge lack of alternate history about American Indians, indigenous peoples. Many people don't like to think about genocides in America. They likely were never taught about them. Many of them don't want to be reminded, or they want to believe these genocides never happened, that it was all an accident. I've had great success using alternate history to teach my students, show them that absolutely nothing in history was inevitable. It never had to be. The worst of human history is always a conscious choice. How things turn out is based on how evil the evil choose to be, and how well and how strongly good people choose to stand up to them, or stop them. The way things turn out in history took a very specific set of circumstances. Sometimes history can turn on very small things. Change even one and you have an entirely different history, different present, different society. Today we talk about, what if Catholic monks had led that first expedition instead of Columbus? What if a leader dedicated to religious conversion commands the first Spanish expedition to the Americas instead of Columbus? I've been arguing for the last 4 videos that if almost anyone, almost literally anyone else, colonizes and invades instead of those Europeans who did, native people in the world are far better off. Today I'm arguing it was not inevitable that Europeans conquer and commit genocides. Those who claim they would are being racist and stereotyping whites. There is no reason that those Europeans who invaded committed genocide, except that they made a conscious choice to do so, for greed and power. It may be hard to hear this, but we live right now in a dystopian world, one of the worst of all possible outcomes for anybody who is not white. America is today 98% non-native. At least 75 million to 112 million natives were killed by not one genocide, but a series of them, the last of them ending only in Peru in the year 2000. There were genocides in America, Brazil, Canada, Guatemala, Argentina, Mexico, and elsewhere. On top of that is massive genocide denial. This is not taught in almost all American schools. There are racist images everywhere that are often not admitted to be racist. But all this could change if someone other than Columbus or other genocidal conquerors are in command. Columbus is still honored as a hero by those who don't know about his genocide. They were never taught about it. Or they know about it but refuse to believe because they don't like to think about it. Or they hate natives, or academics, or leftists. It's important that we, all of us, know and remember truthfully exactly what he did. Columbus led an invasion force of 1,200 soldiers with cannon, armor, cavalry, and fighting dogs. They tortured, raped, mutilated, and massacred, demanding gold as tribute. Columbus's army killed at least 3 million Taino people. Contrary to genocide denial, there were no deaths from epidemics until 1512, 20 years after the invasion, after his army had systematically starved them out and made them vulnerable to disease. These men were not explorers. They were soldiers and mercenaries out for wealth. Very few were from noble or educated backgrounds. Their leaders were hidalgos, minor nobility, or those who had been cut out from inheritance. They came not to explore, but to conquer, pillage, and get wealthy. They were deeply intolerant, since Spain had just come out of fighting Muslims for 700 years. Their nation had just kicked out all its Muslims and Jews. The Inquisition would seek out and persecute anyone whose faith was not rigid enough, or even slightly different. But there were also very different Spaniards who came over. Spanish priests and monks were the strongest opponents of conquest, genocide, and colonialism. Entire orders like the Dominicans, Franciscans, and Jesuits stood against cruelty, war, and inequality as unjust and against Christian principle. The best known of them was Bartolome de las Casas. In a famous debate, Las Casas argued all the world is human, including natives. Natives should be protected rather than massacred to win them over to Christian beliefs. He declared once Columbus landed, the devil took over. Las Casas and other priests refused to offer sacraments to conquerors, no mass, no confession, no baptism for their children, and no last rites. For their principled opposition, they faced the racist rage of the conquerors and frequent death threats. Catholic orders convinced King Carlos V to pass the new laws in 1542. Killing Indians was now illegal unless you were at war. No torture unless convicted of a crime. No rapes. Labor was limited to 1 day out of 5, where before you could work them to death. Spaniards couldn't even enter an Indian village without permission from a judge. To enforce it, they had viceroys, special prosecutors, and investigators. The king and queen's official title now included Protector of Indians. Some Spanish conquerors demanded to hold on to power and continue abusing, so they revolted against the king. They were defeated. Their leaders hung as traitors. Remembering and admitting the absolutely true facts that Columbus and other invaders committed genocides is always very important. Stopping genocide denial is important. How genocides end are equally important. Europeans, whites, Spaniards, who had just fought a brutal 700-year holy war and kicked out anyone who was not of their faith, they include both the genocidal and the hateful, and holy men and monarchs who want to live up to the ideals of their faith. Stopping genocide was not only possible, it was done. What if Spaniards decide to act sooner? This is one of the stories I wrote for What If Natives Won, called All the World is Human. I imagine the famous debate happening not in 1540, but in 1493. Isabella passes the new laws immediately. Columbus is thrown out of Spain, leads an invasion force for Portugal, is defeated and killed. One other way it could happen is if the expedition had been led from the beginning by priests looking to convert instead of invaders greedy for gold. The most likely candidate is Father Pedro de Cordoba, leader of the Dominican order. In our own timeline, Cordoba spoke often and early, calling for an end to conquest and humane treatment of natives in line with Christian principle. Instead of sending the mercenaries who made up Columbus's invasion, Spain could send fighting military orders of Catholic monks, as they did during the Middle and early modern ages. These include the orders of Calatrava, Alcantara, and Knights Templar. The Order of Hospitallers could care for the injured. These fighting orders could be joined by armed Dominicans as part of the militia of the faith. All took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Greed for gold and widespread rapes, so common among Columbus's brutal mercenaries, would be far less. What would this empire of Spain's look like instead? It would be bound by faith, not greed for gold and silver. It would build alliances and aim for quick conquest, with no atrocities against civilians. Rape, torture, atrocities would all be officially barred. It would be ordinary war, not multiple genocides. The death toll would be more typical of wars, 10% or less, instead of the 98% killed by Columbus's genocide. There would also be trade, mostly European guns for native gold and silver. This means the more powerful native states become even larger in size. Aztecs and Incas can easily manufacture their own guns once they've seen European ones. But other European powers would still come: Portugal, France, England, Netherlands, Sweden. But they would often face natives armed and trained by Spanish fighting orders. There was a similar example in our timeline. Jesuit priests in what became Paraguay, Argentina, and Bolivia, armed and trained Guarani and other natives, almost 200,000 of them. They successfully protected them from Portuguese slave raids for almost 150 years. They were also economically successful, an early example of socialism. Disease death tolls would also be far, far less. In our own timeline, there were some limited epidemics in Jesuit missions, but that ended. As I've argued in the past 4 videos, European diseases didn't spread at first. Not until decades of deliberate starvation tactics made natives far more vulnerable. The best known and most notorious example was the U.S. Army slaughtering 100 million buffalo to starve out plains tribes, killing many by epidemics. That doesn't happen under this. If Spaniards come as evangelizers driven by faith instead of colonizers for greed, Caribbean island nations would today be over 90% native, instead of high European and black populations. So would the rest of Spanish colonies or allies, from California to today's Argentina. and other colonial powers would have a much harder fight against Spanish armed native nations. That certainly counts as native victory. This is the end of the sixth video. I look forward to your comments and questions, and will answer them as often as I can. Racism, genocide denial, childish behavior, or personal attacks will get deleted. But I do recognize some questions will be asked in ignorance, because much of the facts I point to are new to most people. They were never taught about this. They've been raised in denial, since denying indigenous genocides is taught in almost all public schools. Next time we will discuss what if Hawaii was seized by a European power, by Spaniards, Russians, or English, instead of the US. Please repost freely, like, share, comment, subscribe. I will post again in about a week. This has been What If Natives Won video blog and channel.